$1 million question, Dinesh. This is the thought that I kept having throughout the whole movie. I say deep state because I'm just talking about government bureaucrats overreaching their authority or abusing their authority, but if the deep state or one of their intermediaries, big tech or nonprofits, targets anybody who threatens the regime, so use you as an example, use me as an example, if we become so effective in exposing their corruption and actually rooting out the problem to try to solve it, that they feel threatened and they come after us, how do we actually solve the problem? Because there are big institutional changes that need to be made. It's not like playing whack-a-mole where there's one person, two people, five people, that if we can just fire them, get them out of office, the problem will be changed. How do we successfully address this if everybody who becomes a threat is targeted, unfortunately, successfully?
You know, my view on this, Liz, is that the safest place to be is out front and on the front line. And so it's not that easy. So for example, let's say they come and smash through my door. It's a little too obvious. I just made a film called Police State. It opens next week. They're at my door. I mean, nothing would ratify this film anymore. And also, having studied the police state, made a film about it, I'm kind of savvy. I'm not going to be like the January 6th protester who goes, oh, FBI agents, come sit down. Let me give you a long statement and an 8-hour interview. You know, one of the things we've learned is to be rationally distrustful of many of these institutions that we once trusted really implicitly. So that's the first point. The second point is that there needs to be a shift in Republican psychology, because as you say, many Republicans, because they're essentially generally deferential to authority, obviously back the blue, they tend to think, I can't really speak critically of these police agencies of government. Aren't we supposed to be for these guys? Well, not really. A police state is inherently lawless. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't use the sort of facade of law. It does. If you look at a typical January 6th proceeding, or even look at this judge who's putting a gag order right now on Trump, you know, the courtroom looks normal, and you've got a bailiff, and you've got seats, and you've got robes, and you've got a process underway. But on the other hand, when the system is corrupted and the people in it are corrupted, you have a facade of legitimacy and not legitimacy itself. Now, we have a Republican House, we have a Supreme Court, we have Republican governors and secretaries of state and attorneys general. There are many ways to push back on the police state, but by and large, our side doesn't use its power because our side is either fearful or timid. And so part of the point of this movie, and I don't go into this very much in the movie, but I think it's the effect of the movie, is to tell people, hey, listen, you're not like Jimmy Stewart in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where you're in a peaceful small town and you can say things like, I'm not going to own a gun. I'm going to rely on my law books. And if the other side produces guns, I'm going to be better than they are. And I'm going to report them to the authorities. You're more like a guy who's gone out west in covered wagons, and there are outlaws who've circled around your homestead, and they've got long guns, and they want to burn your homestead and rape your wife and kill your kids. And if you then say in those circumstances, I'm not going to go reach for my rifle, I'm better than that, I'm a man of principle, it just shows that you have no grasp of the situation. So part of my movie is intended to be, and I think you can affirm, it's done in a very sober way. At no point am I shrill or shouting or saying, oh, here comes the police state. I am methodically laying out what is going on in the country. Very often my cinematic recreations are things that are clinically described by people, and I'm just recreating them on the screen. And I hired FBI consultants so that everything is done to the letter, meaning I wanted law enforcement guys to watch this movie and say, if that FBI raid occurred, it would have occurred exactly like that.
Yeah, and that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because the movie is almost understated. I think that's why it rattled me more than a dramatic retelling would have, because drama, I mean, you're just being emotionally manipulated if people are screaming at you and using all kinds of dramatic music. That's not what the movie was. Like, you were very methodical. It was almost, your arguments were almost simple. They were distilled so clearly, but it made it so clear. It was like, okay, well, that's exactly what's happening. What's going to happen next? So if you had to distill this change in Republican psychology that you think is necessary to save ourselves and therefore our country, would you define it as Republicans need to become more skeptical of the institutions, both cultural and governmental, in our country?
more skeptical, more fearless, more willing to use their own legitimate authority. So, for example, nothing stops the gangsterism of one side better than the other side saying, hey, listen, two can play at this game. And so, for example, if prominent Republican attorneys general start issuing indictments of prominent Democrats, and I'm not talking about bogus indictments, I'm talking about legitimate indictments. So, for example, indict Mayorkas. Why? Because child trafficking is going on in a large way in Arizona, and that's occurring in that state. And so an Arizona attorney general indicts Mayorkas and see where it goes. It's a constitutional crisis. Okay, let the Supreme Court sort it out. So the point being, if you do this, I mean, remember when Elon Musk banned a group of liberal journalists, maybe 5 or 6 of them, for one day on Twitter? They went nuts. They rediscovered all the virtues of free speech. They were quoting John Stuart Mill. I mean, they sounded like apostles of open debate and freedom. So the moment that they themselves are beginning to feel the sting of what they're doing, they begin to back off.
Which, by the way, was one of the most fun days on Twitter ever. I'm glad you brought that up because I had momentarily forgotten about when he punished them, put them in timeout just to hear them squeal and shout and call for no censorship and open debate and free speech. Talk about the role of COVID. You mentioned COVID. It's a very short part of the film here, but I think that you're correct when you say that it served as an accelerant to what January 6th had maybe already begun. I mean, I know the draconian COVID stuff happened before January 6th, but the censorship stuff really happened after, in 2021.
Yeah, the censorship before was limited to one issue. And by and large, it was like many of these digital platforms sort of canonized Fauci, and they said, if Fauci says it, it is science. So there was a kind of a comic stupidity to the whole thing. But nevertheless, it was limited to one issue. After January 6th, the issues expanded, of course, initially election fraud, but pretty soon there was a long list. And if you go now on the YouTube guidelines, you've got the trans issue, you've got abortion, you've got climate, you've got elections. So now it's basically censorship across the board. COVID added a few elements like restrictions on church attendance, which I don't think otherwise would ever have been enacted. That would never fly. But COVID allowed the left to exploit panic. Panic and fear are the great friends of the police state. And this is really why the climate issue is so big for the left, because it has the same sort of potential. Oh, it's an apocalypse. The oceans are going to swallow up our coasts. Now, what's difficult is no one really believes that. I mean, people are still buying properties, on the ocean. Real estate agents are selling and so on. So there's no evidence that the market gives any significance to any of this. So the propaganda has to be really high for it to begin to sink in. But yes, the fear of a virus allows the left to seek wartime restrictions on people that they would never otherwise consent to.